Mara Whitfield watched a county officer chain the only gate to her pasture and order all 46 of her cattle removed before sundown. Standing beside him was her wealthy neighbor, Grant Holloway, already talking about fines, towing equipment, and what would happen if she refused. Mara didn't argue. She didn't move a single cow. Instead, she asked the officer one question. Before you close that road, did anyone check who owns the ground underneath it? Grant laughed. The officer didn't. He called the county office, gave them the road number, and waited. 10 minutes later, his supervisor called back with an answer that made him remove his hand from the chain. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, what would you do if the county ordered your cattle off land your family had used for decades? And subscribe for more stories about hardworking farmers who defend their land with patience, courage, and facts. Mara Whitfield saw the red notice before she saw the county truck. It had been stapled directly to the wooden gate leading to her north pasture, bright enough to catch her eye from 50 yards away. Sankey Enforcement Norty. Mara stopped beside the gate and read it twice. According to the notice, her cattle were obstructing a designated public agricultural access corridor. She had 72 hours to remove all livestock from the pasture and clear the gate from what the county described as its right-of-way. Mara looked beyond the fence. 46 cattle grazed peacefully across the hillside. The same pasture her family had used for decades. The same gate her father had replaced with his own hands. And suddenly the county was telling her she had no right to use it. A pickup slowed on the gravel road behind her. Grant Holloway lowered his window. Looks like they finally sorted it out. Mara turned. Grant owned nearly 2,000 acres bordering her eastern property. For months, heavy equipment had been appearing near his ranch as he prepared to expand his cattle operation. You knew about this? Mara asked. Grant shrugged. I knew the county was reviewing access. Why? Because that road isn't supposed to be blocked by a private gate. Mara looked at the gate, then back at him. It's been here 23 years. Doesn't make it yours. Grant drove away before she could answer. That bothered Mara more than the notice itself. He hadn't sounded surprised. Inside the farmhouse, Mara pulled the property documents from an old steel filing cabinet. Her deed, tax maps, fence receipts, a survey her father had commissioned years earlier. Then she compared the parcel number on her deed with the number printed at the bottom of the enforcement notice. She stopped. They weren't the same. Only one digit was different. But on county property records, one digit could mean an entirely different tract of land. Mara called the number on the notice. After 3 transfers, a county clerk finally opened the road file. I'm looking at the map now, the woman said. Mara gave her parcel number. There was a pause. Then keyboard clicks. Ma'am, the county map shows a public right-of-way running through that location. Who owns the land underneath it? Another pause. I'm only telling you what our access layer shows. That's not what I asked. The clerk became noticeably quieter. Mara looked through the kitchen window toward her cattle. Does the county own that road? This time, the answer came slowly. According to our map, the clerk hesitated. That road hasn't belonged to your family in decades. Mara lowered her eyes to her father's old survey. A handwritten note in the margin suddenly caught her attention. 3 words, easement. Not ownership. Mara Whitfield read the handwritten note again. Easement. Not ownership. Her father had written it in pencil, beside a narrow line running along the eastern edge of the survey. Mara knew enough about land records not to jump to conclusions. An easement could still give someone the legal right to use land they didn't own. But it was enough to make one thing clear. The county clerk's answer wasn't the end of the story. The next morning, Mara drove the access road from one end to the other. It wasn't much of a road. Gravel in the center. Grass along both shoulders. A drainage ditch on one side. Her cattle gate stood near the point where the road crossed into the north pasture. Beyond it, the route continued toward Grant Holloway's property. That's when Mara noticed something new. Orange survey flags. They ran along the roadside every 20 feet. Farther ahead, fresh stakes marked a corridor nearly twice as wide as the existing road. Mara stopped her truck. Grant hadn't complained because of her cattle. He needed the road wider. She drove directly to the county planning office. A clerk eventually produced the complaint that had triggered the enforcement review. The applicant's name appeared at the top. Grant Holloway, filed 17 days earlier. Mara read slowly. Grant claimed her gate interfered with an existing county right-of-way and prevented agricultural vehicles from using the corridor at its historically established width. Attached to the complaint was a preliminary site plan. Mara studied it. Grant was adding a new livestock handling facility and equipment yard near the eastern boundary of his ranch. The proposed route for feed trucks, stock trailers, and heavy machinery ran directly along the disputed road. If the corridor remained as narrow as it was now, some of those vehicles would have difficulty making the turn. If the county declared the full 40-foot strip public right-of-way, Grant wouldn't need to buy anything from Mara. Her fence could simply be moved. She found him that afternoon beside a flatbed trailer. "You filed the complaint." Grant didn't deny it. "I asked the county to restore access. For your trucks. For legal agricultural traffic." Mara held up the site plan. "You need my fence moved. I need the county road open to its proper width. My family has maintained that road for years." Grant smiled. "Maintaining something doesn't mean you own it." Mara didn't answer. He stepped closer. "You've got 46 cattle sitting behind a gate the county says shouldn't be there. I'd start thinking about where you're going to move them." Then he walked away. Back home, Mara spread Grant's complaint beside her father's survey. One sentence kept bothering her. Existing county right-of-way must be restored to its full width. She searched every document in the cabinet: deeds, tax records, old fence agreements. Nothing mentioned a 40-foot county road. Then, tucked behind a yellowed property plat, she found a folded document dated 1968. Across the top were the words "Grant of Limited Easement." Mara unfolded it carefully. Halfway down the first page, she found a sentence that changed the meaning of Grant's complaint completely. The county had been given permission to use the land. It had never been given the land itself. The limited easement answered one question. It created several more. Mara Whitfield read the document 3 times before placing it beside the enforcement notice. The county had received permission to cross a narrow strip of her family's land in 1968. But permission wasn't ownership. And nothing on the first page explained why the county now claimed a 40-foot public corridor. Unfortunately, Mara had less than 60 hours left to prove the difference. Moving 46 cattle wasn't as simple as opening another gate. Her north pasture had the most reliable water system on the ranch, 2 troughs supplied by a buried line from the main well. The south pasture was smaller and already being rested after heavy grazing. Keeping the entire herd there could damage the forage before the season ended. Transporting them elsewhere meant trailers, temporary pasture, additional feed, and labor. Mara called 2 nearby ranchers. Neither had enough available ground. The third offered space 27 miles away. "How much?" Mara asked. He gave her the figure. She wrote it down and stared at the number. That was before transportation, before supplemental hay, before moving 46 nervous animals twice. The county's 72-hour order could cost her thousands before anyone even determined whether the order was legal. That afternoon, Grant Holloway pulled into her driveway. He didn't come empty-handed. He carried an envelope. "I heard you're having trouble finding pasture." Mara didn't invite him inside. "What do you want, Grant?" He handed her a written offer. He wanted to purchase a strip along the access road, including the land occupied by her fence. The price was far below what Mara expected. "You filed the complaint," she said, "and now you're offering to buy the land the county says I don't own?" Grant's expression tightened. "I'm offering you a way out. Of a problem you created. Of a problem that already existed." Mara handed the offer back. "No." Grant didn't take it immediately. "Think carefully." "I already did." He finally grabbed the envelope. "By Friday, you won't have a gate there to argue about." After he left, Mara walked to the north pasture. Her cattle gathered near the trough as water flowed quietly into the tank. 46 animals depending on ground her family had managed for generations. This wasn't about a wooden gate anymore. Grant needed access. The county believed it had authority, and Mara was trapped between them. She returned to the farmhouse and called the one person whose name had appeared on her father's old survey. The original surveyor had retired years ago, but his firm was still operating. A licensed land surveyor named Daniel Pierce answered. Mara explained the notice, the 40-foot claim, and the 1968 easement. Daniel went silent. Then he asked one question. Do you still have the original survey? It's sitting in front of me. Don't mark on it. Don't fold it again. Mara frowned. Why? Because if your father's survey is accurate. Daniel paused. The county map may not match what's actually on the ground. Daniel Pierce arrived the next morning with a survey case, a GPS receiver, and none of the confidence Mara expected. He didn't tell her she was right. He didn't tell her the county was wrong. He simply asked for every document she had. Mara spread them across the kitchen table. The enforcement notice. Her deed. The 1968 limited easement. Her father's survey. Grant Holloway's complaint. Daniel studied them for nearly 20 minutes. Then he tapped the county map. This is GIS. Mara waited. It's useful for reference, he explained. But it isn't a boundary survey. He placed her father's survey beside it. And these two don't agree. They walked the access road together. Daniel stopped repeatedly to take measurements. The county's digital map showed a 40-foot right-of-way centered almost perfectly on the existing gravel road. But the old survey showed something different. The easement was narrower, and its centerline didn't follow the modern road exactly. At several points, the gravel had gradually shifted toward Mara's property. Daniel looked toward the orange stakes Grant's contractor had placed. Who set those? Grant's people. They're marking the county map. Is that wrong? Daniel shook his head. Not necessarily. But it doesn't prove ownership. Near the cattle gate, he pushed a metal probe into the soil. Nothing. He moved 3 feet toward the fence and tried again. Then 5 more. The probe struck something solid. Daniel knelt and carefully removed several inches of packed dirt. A rusted iron pin appeared beneath the surface. Mara crouched beside him. What is it? Possibly an original survey monument. He cleaned the top without moving it, then recorded its coordinates. Daniel walked another 100 yards and found a second marker. This one matched the bearing written on her father's survey almost perfectly. His expression changed. The county's line is off. By how much? It varies. Here? Nearly 12 feet. Mara looked toward Grant's orange stakes. Several stood well inside the boundary Daniel had just identified. Grant appeared before they finished. He parked on the shoulder and walked toward them. You surveying a county road now? Daniel answered calmly. I'm surveying Mrs. Whitfield's property. Grant pointed toward the gravel. County records already show the right-of-way. County GIS shows it, Daniel corrected. That's not the same thing. Grant's smile disappeared. You'd better be certain. I intend to be. Daniel returned to his equipment. Grant looked at Mara. You're running out of time. Then he drove away. Near sunset, Daniel completed his preliminary measurements. He spread the old plat across Mara's truck hood and drew a light pencil line beside the modern road. Mara immediately saw the problem. The current gravel road didn't simply cross an easement. Part of it had drifted outside the recorded easement entirely. Daniel pointed toward the buried iron marker. If this monument verifies against the original plat, your father was right. Mara looked at him. About what? Daniel folded his measuring rod. The county may have had permission to use part of this property. He glanced toward the road. But Mara, the road itself may be sitting in the wrong place. The buried survey pins gave Mara Whitfield something she hadn't had 3 days earlier. A reason to challenge the county. But Daniel Pierce warned her not to celebrate yet. A boundary tells us where your land is, he said. It doesn't automatically tell us what rights someone else has over it. He tapped the 1968 document. This does. They sat at Mara's kitchen table and read the limited easement line by line. The agreement had been signed by Mara's grandfather and recorded with the county more than 50 years earlier. The language was surprisingly specific. The county had permission to use a narrow strip across the Whitfield property for road maintenance, drainage work, and emergency agricultural access. It did not transfer ownership. It did not describe a 40-foot public road. and nothing in the document granted unrestricted access for private commercial expansion. Mara looked toward Grant Holloway's preliminary site plan. So he can't widen it for his trucks? Daniel shook his head. That's a legal question for the county attorney. But this document definitely doesn't say what his complaint says. That distinction mattered. Grant's application described the route as an existing county right-of-way at its full historical width. The original document described something much narrower and much more limited. Mara called the county enforcement office immediately. She explained what Daniel had found and offered to email the recorded easement. The officer on the phone sounded less certain than the clerk had. I'll attach it to the case. Does that stop the 72-hour order? Not automatically. My cattle are supposed to be removed tomorrow. I understand. Then what happens tomorrow? There was a pause. Unless enforcement receives instructions otherwise, the notice remains active. Mara closed her eyes. The evidence was getting stronger. The deadline wasn't moving. That evening, Daniel returned to the easement one last time. He had noticed a paragraph near the bottom of the second page, written in dense legal language. Mara. She came around the table. What? Read this. The clause stated that the easement existed only, while the route continued serving the public maintenance and emergency purposes described in the agreement. If the county formally abandoned that use, any rights granted under the agreement could terminate according to its recorded conditions. Mara read it again. So if they stopped using it, don't jump ahead, Daniel warned. We need proof. How far back? As far as the records go. The next morning, Mara requested decades of road maintenance records. Work orders, gravel contracts, culvert repairs, snow removal logs, anything connected to the disputed section. The county clerk searched the database, then searched again. I have maintenance records for the road north of your property. What about my section? More keyboard clicks. Nothing. Finally, the clerk said, Mrs. Whitfield, the last electronic maintenance entry I can find for that segment is more than 20 years old. Mara's pulse quickened. Can you check archived records? I can. How long? Probably a day. Mara looked at the red enforcement notice still lying on her table. She didn't have a day. The county crew was scheduled to arrive the next morning. Then the clerk spoke again. Wait. Mara heard papers moving. I found a scanned document attached to an older road file. What kind of document? The clerk went silent for several seconds. When she finally answered, her voice had changed. It says Notice of Abandonment of Maintenance. Mara Whitfield asked the clerk to send the document immediately. 3 minutes later, an email appeared on her phone. The scanned page was dated 17 years earlier. Across the top, Notice of Abandonment of Maintenance. Mara read every line. The county had formally discontinued routine maintenance on the portion of road crossing the Whitfield property after determining it was no longer necessary for county operations. That sounded important. But Daniel Pierce refused to overstate it. Abandoning maintenance doesn't always erase an easement, he warned. We need the original agreement and this notice reviewed together. Mara nodded. She wasn't looking for a shortcut. She wanted something the county couldn't dismiss. They spent the afternoon building a timeline. 17 years ago, county maintenance ended. 16 years ago, Mara's father purchased gravel and resurfaced the road himself. 14 years ago, he replaced a failed culvert. 9 years ago, Mara paid a contractor to grade the entire section. 5 years ago, she installed the current cattle gate. County maintenance records showed nothing during the same period. Mara still had receipts for nearly everything. Daniel spread them across the table. This doesn't prove every legal issue by itself, but it proves your family wasn't secretly relying on county maintenance. Mara added another receipt to the pile, and nobody objected to the gate. Apparently not. Near dusk, Grant Holloway's pickup stopped outside. He remained on the other side of the fence. You planning to move those cattle tonight? Mara looked toward the herd. No. County comes tomorrow. I know. Grant shook his head. You're betting your ranch on old paperwork. No. Mara held up the abandonment notice. I'm making them read their own paperwork. For the first time, Grant had no quick response. His eyes settled on the document. What is that? You'll find out tomorrow. After he left, Mara called the county road department. An older employee named Frank Dorsey answered. He remembered the route. Barely used it even back then, he said. County stopped maintaining that stretch years ago. Why? New access opened from the north. Didn't make sense sending equipment through Whitfield land anymore. Mara tightened her grip on the phone. Was the old route ever reopened as a county road? Not that I remember. Did the county maintain my section after that? Frank laughed softly. If we had, there'd be work orders. There weren't. Before sunrise the next morning, Mara placed copies of everything into a folder. The original easement, the abandonment notice, maintenance records, gravel invoices, culvert receipts, Daniel's preliminary survey. Then she walked outside. Her 46 cattle were still exactly where the county had ordered them not to be. At 7:42, two county vehicles appeared at the end of the road. A maintenance truck followed. Grant's pickup arrived less than 5 minutes later. The enforcement officer stepped out carrying a heavy chain and padlock. Mara Whitfield? Yes. Your compliance period has expired. He walked toward the gate. Mara didn't block him. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held the folder against her side. The officer threaded the chain through the first steel bar. Then Mara asked, "Before you lock that gate, did anyone check who owns the ground underneath your boots?" The officers stopped. Grant smiled. But Mara noticed something he didn't. The county supervisor standing behind the officer had suddenly gone pale. The county supervisor stepped forward before the enforcement officer could close the padlock. Hold on. Grant Holloway's smile faded. The officer kept one hand on the chain. What's wrong? The supervisor looked at Mara Whitfield. What exactly do you have in that folder? Mara handed him the first document, the recorded easement from 1968. Then the second. Your county's notice abandoning maintenance 17 years ago. Then Daniel Pierce's preliminary survey. And this shows the current road doesn't even follow the recorded easement in several places. The supervisor stopped talking. Grant walked closer. None of that changes the county right-of-way. Daniel stepped out from beside Mara's truck. That's precisely what hasn't been established. Grant looked irritated. The county map establishes it. No, Daniel replied. The GIS layer displays it. He pointed toward the buried survey monument they had uncovered. A recorded deed, easement, and verified boundary evidence establish property interests. A GIS line isn't a substitute for title work. The enforcement officer slowly removed his hand from the chain. He looked at his supervisor. You knew about this? No. The supervisor pulled out his phone. But we're finding out now. Mara stood beside the gate while he called the county office. She could hear only fragments. Whitfield parcel. 1968 easement. Yes, recorded. Abandonment notice. Then silence. The supervisor walked several yards away. Grant followed him. You can't stop enforcement because she found some old document. The supervisor covered the phone. Mr. Holloway, please step back. My permit depends on that access. That sentence changed everything. The supervisor stared at him. Your permit? Grant realized too late what he'd said. Mara said nothing. Neither did Daniel. The supervisor returned to the call. Send me the underlying parcel record. Another pause. No, not the road layer. The actual parcel. Several minutes passed. The cattle gathered near the fence, curious about the vehicles. One cow pushed its nose between the rails. The absurdity wasn't lost on Mara. The county had arrived prepared to remove 46 cattle. Now 3 officials stood beside the gate, trying to determine whether they had authority over the ground they were standing on. The supervisor's phone rang again. He answered, listened, then turned toward the enforcement officer. Take the chain off. Grant stepped forward. What? Enforcement is suspended. You can't do that. I just did. The officer pulled the chain free. The metal dropped into the truck bed with a heavy clang. Mara didn't smile. Does that mean the notice is withdrawn? Not yet, the supervisor said. County council needs to review the title history. So, my cattle stay? He looked toward the pasture. Until that review is complete. Yes. Grant shook his head. This is ridiculous. The supervisor ignored him. Then his phone buzzed with an incoming email. He opened the attachment. His expression hardened. Mara. He turned the screen toward Daniel. A parcel map appeared beneath the road overlay. Daniel enlarged it, then enlarged it again. The boundary line was unmistakable. The supervisor looked down at the gravel beneath his boots, then at Mara. The road layer says county access. He swallowed. But the underlying parcel, he stopped. Daniel finished the sentence for him. Is still titled to the Whitfield property. The county supervisor stared at the parcel map for several seconds. Grant Holloway was the first to break the silence. Owning the ground doesn't mean she controls the road. Daniel Pierce nodded. That's true. Grant almost smiled. Then Daniel added, but the county still has to prove it holds a valid right to use it. Mara Whitfield opened her folder again. And that's the part nobody checked. By early afternoon, the enforcement crew was gone. The chain was gone. The red notice remained on the gate, but someone had written across it in black marker. Enforcement suspended. Title review pending. Mara's 46 cattle remained exactly where they had been. No trailers. No emergency pasture. No thousands of dollars wasted moving them. But Mara knew the fight wasn't over. County Council requested the complete title history. Daniel joined the review. So did a county records officer, who pulled the original 1968 document from the archive rather than relying on the digital roadmap. What they found was surprisingly simple. The Whitfield family had never transferred ownership of the strip, not 1 foot of it. The county had received only a limited easement for specific purposes. Then came the harder question. Was that easement still active? The county attorney compared the original language with the 17-year-old abandonment notice. He requested maintenance records. There were none after abandonment. He checked whether the county had formally reinstated the route. It hadn't. Then he examined Daniel's survey. Even if the old easement had remained enforceable, portions of the modern gravel road had shifted beyond its recorded limits. By late afternoon, the county attorney reached his conclusion. The enforcement order could not stand. Mara returned to the gate when the supervisor arrived with the official withdrawal. He removed the red notice himself. Your cattle don't have to be moved. Mara accepted the paper. And the road? The underlying land is yours. What about county access? Our legal department does not consider the old easement sufficient authority for the enforcement action we issued. It wasn't dramatic. No judge slammed a gavel. Nobody applauded. But the chain that had nearly closed Mara's gate now lay useless in the back of a county truck. That was enough. Grant wasn't satisfied. My expansion permit was approved based on access through here. The county attorney, who had arrived moments earlier, turned toward him. That's actually something we need to discuss. Grant frowned. What? The attorney opened another file. Your application identifies this corridor as county-owned right-of-way. That's what your map showed. That isn't the problem. He pulled out Grant's signed application. Attached behind it was a title review checklist. One box had been marked, Property Access Verify. Beneath it was Grant Holloway's signature. The attorney looked directly at him. Mr. Holloway, our records show your consultant warned that ownership of this corridor had not been verified. Grant's face changed. Mara said nothing. The county attorney turned one more page. There was an email attached. And suddenly the dispute was no longer about whether Mara had blocked a county road. It was about whether Grant had knowingly built his entire expansion plan around land he knew might never have been the county's to give him. The email was only 6 sentences long, but one sentence changed the entire dispute. Mara Whitfield watched as the county attorney read it aloud. Ownership of the Whitfield access corridor remains unverified. Do not rely on the county GIS layer as evidence of title. The message had been sent to Grant Holloway nearly 3 weeks before he filed his complaint. Grant stared at the document. That doesn't mean I knew the county had no rights. No, the attorney replied. But it means you knew there was a title question. Grant pointed toward the road. Your own map showed a county right-of-way. A map you were specifically warned not to treat as proof of ownership. Grant fell silent. Mara finally understood why everything had moved so quickly. Grant hadn't simply complained about a gate. His expansion depended on getting that gate removed before anyone examined the underlying records closely. If the corridor could be treated as county-controlled access, his heavy trucks could reach the new livestock facility without requiring a separate agreement with Mara. Without that access, his entire site plan had a problem, a very expensive one. The county attorney closed the folder. Your permit is being placed on administrative hold. Grant's head snapped up. For how long? Until lawful access is established. My contractors start next week. Then you should contact them. Grant turned toward Mara. You planned this. She almost laughed. You filed the complaint. You brought the county here. And you knew what would happen. No, Grant. Mara glanced toward her 46 cattle. 3 days ago, I was trying to figure out where I could afford to move my herd. That silenced him. She hadn't trapped him. She had simply refused to move until someone checked the facts. The following afternoon, Grant returned alone. No county officials. No contractors. No lawyers. He parked outside Mara's gate and placed a folder on the hood of her truck. Inside was a proposal. He wanted a permanent access agreement across part of her property. In return, he offered enough money to replace fencing, improve the road, and compensate Mara for future use. It was far more generous than the insulting offer he'd made days earlier. Mara read every page, then closed the folder. No. Grant stared at her. You haven't even negotiated. I'm willing to negotiate. Then what's the problem? This agreement gives you too much. She pointed toward the pasture. Unlimited truck traffic. Road widening. 24-hour access. And you can assign those rights to whoever owns your ranch after you. Grant's jaw tightened. I need reliable access. And I need a working cattle ranch. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other across the gate he had tried to remove. Finally, Mara handed the proposal back. I'll give you access. Grant blinked. Under my conditions. What conditions? Mara looked down the narrow gravel road. The same road everyone had fought over. Then back toward her cattle. First, we stop pretending your ranch is the only one this road has to serve. Mara Whitfield could have ended the conversation with one sentence. No access. The land beneath the disputed road belonged to her. The county had withdrawn its enforcement order. Grant Holloway's expansion permit was frozen. And without an agreement, his trucks had no guaranteed route to the new livestock facility. For 3 days, Grant had tried to use county authority to force Mara's gate open. Now he needed her permission to pass through it. But Mara wasn't interested in revenge. She was interested in making sure nobody could put her ranch in this position again. She placed a single-page proposal on the hood of her truck. Here's what I'm willing to discuss. Grant began reading. The road would remain its current width except for 2 designated passing areas. Heavy trucks could use it only during agreed daytime hours. No vehicles could block Mara's cattle crossings. Grant would pay 70% of future gravel, drainage, and maintenance costs because his expansion would create most of the heavy traffic. Any damage to fences, gates, water lines, or pasture caused by his contractors would be repaired at his expense. And most importantly, the agreement would grant access rights only. Not ownership. Not control. Not permission to widen the corridor whenever he wanted. Grant looked up. 70%? Your trucks are why the road needs upgrading. 50. 65. He studied her. 60. Mara nodded. 60. It was the first agreement they'd reached since the dispute began. But one clause remained. Grant pointed to it. Whitfield livestock operations retain priority during scheduled cattle movement. You can close the road temporarily. For how long? Long enough to move cattle safely between pastures. My trucks can't sit around for hours. They won't. Mara looked toward the herd. But 46 cattle don't move around tractor trailers because your schedule is expensive. Grant said nothing. For once, the animals he had treated as an inconvenience were part of the negotiation. 2 days later, attorneys converted Mara's proposal into a formal access agreement. The county reviewed it only to ensure Grant's revised permit complied with local road and development requirements. The county would not own the road. Grant would not own the road. Mara would. Grant would simply have defined permission to use it. His attorney placed the final agreement in front of him. You can reject it. Grant looked through the window toward the equipment sitting idle on his property. Then he picked up the pen. Before signing, he turned toward Mara. You could have shut me out completely. Mara shook her head. I wanted my rights respected, Grant. Not your ranch destroyed. His expression changed slightly. Then he signed. But before the meeting ended, the county attorney slid another document across the table. This agreement resolves the access issue. He looked toward Mara. It doesn't resolve what the county did to you. The document in front of Mara Whitfield wasn't another agreement with Grant. It was from the county. At the top were the words, Noter of Withdrawal and Administrative Correction. The county attorney slid it toward her. The enforcement order has been formally withdrawn. Mara read the first page. The county acknowledged that its original action had relied on an inaccurate GIS right-of-way layer without completing the necessary title review. The red notice should never have been issued on that information alone. What happens to the map? Mara asked. It's being corrected. And the road? The property record will show private ownership subject only to whatever access rights are legally recorded from this point forward. That meant Grant's new agreement. Nothing more. There was also the question of what the mistake had cost Mara. She had paid Daniel Pierce for emergency survey work. She had spent money obtaining records. She had lost nearly 3 days of ranch work, preparing for an enforcement action that should never have happened. The county agreed to reimburse her documented expenses and waive every enforcement fee associated with the notice. No enormous settlement. No dramatic courtroom award. Just the costs Mara should never have been forced to pay. For her, that mattered more. She hadn't fought to become richer. She had fought to keep someone else from deciding what happened on her land without first proving they had the right. Grant sat quietly across the table. His revised access agreement was already signed. His expansion permit could now be reconsidered using the legal route Mara had granted him. But the project would be different. No 40-foot corridor. No unrestricted heavy truck traffic. No removal of Mara's cattle gate. Grant finally looked at her. I thought that gate was standing in my way. Mara closed the county document. It wasn't. What was? You were trying to solve your problem by making it mine. Grant looked down at his hands. There wasn't much he could say to that. A week later, county workers returned to Whitfield Farm. This time, they didn't bring chains. They brought updated markers and a replacement sign for the road file. The supervisor who had stopped the enforcement walked over to Mara. We've also changed the review procedure. She raised an eyebrow. Because of this? Before enforcement on disputed rural access, title records have to be checked against the GIS layer. Mara nodded. One corrected procedure wouldn't erase what had happened, but it might keep another farmer from facing the same 72-hour ultimatum. That was enough. Grant's first feed truck arrived the following morning under the new agreement. It stopped at the gate. Not because Mara blocked it. Because 46 cattle were crossing the road between pastures. Grant sat behind the wheel of his pickup and waited. 5 minutes. Then 7. The last cow passed safely through. Mara opened the vehicle gate and stepped aside. Grant drove forward slowly. As he passed, he lowered his window. Guess they have the right of way today. Mara almost smiled. They always had priority. That afternoon, the county supervisor returned one final time. He carried the old red enforcement notice in one hand and something new for Mara's gate in the other. The county supervisor held up a small metal sign. Mara Whitfield read it twice before taking it from him. Whitfield Farm access by agreement. No county road designation. No public right-of-way. No language suggesting anyone else controlled the ground beneath it. Just 5 words that finally described the road exactly as it was. Private property with defined access. Mara ran her thumb across the lettering. Where do you want it? The supervisor asked. She pointed toward the gate, right where the red notice was. 20 minutes later, the new sign was bolted into place. The supervisor stepped back. Looks better than the last one. Mara glanced at him. Definitely less expensive. He laughed quietly. Then his expression became serious. We should have checked the title before we ever came out here. Yes. No anger. No attempt to make him feel better. Just the truth. He nodded. We will next time. That mattered. The reimbursement from the county arrived 2 weeks later. Mara didn't use it for anything dramatic. She replaced the worn hinges on the cattle gate, installed a safer latch, reinforced the crossing where the herd moved between pastures, and added reflective markers so Grant's trucks could see the crossing clearly before reaching it. The road remained narrow. The pasture remained intact, and all 46 cattle remained on Whitfield land, exactly where they had been before the county ordered them removed. Grant's expansion eventually moved forward, smaller than originally planned, slower than he wanted, but legally. His trucks used Mara's road during agreed hours, and his contractors learned quickly that cattle movement came first. There were no more surprise complaints, no orange stakes appearing overnight, no threats about removing gates. Grant and Mara didn't become friends. That would have been too easy. But something more believable happened. They learned where each other's rights ended and where cooperation had to begin. One afternoon, Grant arrived while Mara was moving the herd. He stopped his pickup before the cattle crossing without being asked. 46 cows moved slowly across the gravel. Mara stood beside the open gate, counting them. 43, 44, 45, 46. Only then did she wave Grant through. He rolled down his window. Funny, what? 3 months ago, I thought this gate was costing me everything. Mara rested one hand on the post. It wasn't the gate. Grant nodded. I know. This time, neither of them needed to say what the real problem had been. Near sunset, Mara closed the gate behind the final truck. The new metal sign caught the orange light. She thought about the red notice that had once hung in the same place. 72 hours. 46 cattle. A county order backed by a map almost everyone had trusted without question. Mara hadn't beaten the county by shouting louder. She hadn't destroyed Grant's ranch when she finally gained leverage. She had done something much simpler. She had made everyone prove what they claimed. And once they did, the truth was sitting beneath their feet. The county had arrived to remove 46 cattle from her pasture. Instead, they discovered the one thing nobody had bothered to check. The land beneath the road still belonged to her. If Mara's story reminded you that official-looking maps and confident claims should never replace verified facts, share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if the county gave you only 72 hours to remove your entire herd? If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories about hard-working farmers, property rights, justice, and unexpected victories. Thank you for watching, and remember, you don't have to shout louder than the people trying to take control. Sometimes you only need to make them prove what they claim.